You may be seated. The second scripture reading is from Exodus chapter 35:30 to 36:7. And I feel obligated to just say a little bit to lead up to this reading so I don't sound like This is scripture dealing with Moses, the Israelites, and building a sanctuary while in the desert. Then Moses said to the Israelites, "See, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah. He has filled him with the divine spirit, with skill, intelligence, and knowledge in every kind of craft, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, in every kind of craft. And he has inspired him to teach both him and Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. He has filled them with skill to do every kind of work done by an artisan, or by a designer, or by an embroiderer, in blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and in fine linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of artisan or skilled designer. Bezalel and Oholiab, and every skillful one to whom the Lord has given skill and understanding to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary, shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded." Moses then called Bezalel and Oholiab, and every skillful one to whom the Lord had given skill, everyone whose heart was stirred to come to do the work. And they received from Moses all the freewill offerings that the Israelites had brought for doing the work of the sanctuary. The people still kept bringing Moses freewill offerings every morning, so that all the artisans who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from the task being performed, and said to Moses, "The people are bringing much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do." So Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp, "No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary." So the people were restrained from bringing, for what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So I could tell a joke about two women who are college educated who can't read a bulletin. Because I forgot my part and you forgot your part. So that's okay. God laughs at our attempts. But we will do that prayer of dedication at the end of the service. So keep that handy. So a mother wanted to teach her daughter about giving. So she gave her little girl a quarter and $1 for church, saying, "Put whichever one you want in the collection plate and keep the other one for yourself." Well, when they were coming out of the church, the mother asked her daughter which amount she gave. "Well," said the girl, "I was going to give the $1. But just before the collection, the pastor said that we should all be cheerful givers. I knew I'd be a lot more cheerful if I gave the quarter. So I did." Gotta love little people. Let's pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So we're on the 6th of the 7-part series about the divine calling of the church. We've seen how we're called to move forward, to claim that which God has already prepared for us to do and to be. We are called to be courageous, to love like Jesus, to act for justice. And last week we talked about our call to be united in hope and purpose. Last week you got a little puzzle piece to remind you of your part in this puzzle that is Gila Mountain United Methodist Church, that picture that God has for us. And there's still some pieces sitting out on the entry table if there's someone that comes to mind that you might want to invite to church, or if you weren't here last week and you want to grab a piece. Mine I actually taped to my refrigerator to remind me. Today is that kind of sermon congregations dread hearing and pastors hesitate preaching the dreaded money sermon. But it is inevitable, because a church called to move forward with courage, to love like Jesus and act for justice in unity of hope and purpose ultimately will require money to achieve it. A money sermon is also inevitable because giving and stewardship are a significant theme throughout Scripture. Did you know the first act of giving occurs in chapter 4 of the book of Genesis? That far back. You might recall the story. Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. Cain was a farmer, Abel a shepherd. Cain and Abel had brought their offerings to the Lord, and Cain brought some produce from his fields, and Abel brought fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. And which offering did God find pleasing? The one that Abel brought. And why? Well, Cain gave some of his produce. It reminds me of this story that Paul Harvey told about the Butterball Turkey Company. You see, every year they would have a hotline to answer questions about preparing Thanksgiving turkeys. People would call in and ask questions. Well, this one year, the company received a call from a woman who had stored a turkey in her freezer for, get this, 23 years. And she wanted to know if it would be safe. So the operator told her that it might be safe to serve if the freezer had been kept below 0 degrees the entire time. The operator also warned the woman that even if it were safe, the flavor had probably deteriorated and she wouldn't recommend eating it. The woman replied, well, that's what we thought. We'll just give it to the church. Yeah. But you know, it's not uncommon. Not at all. In the church to get, we don't want it, we'll give it to the church. We get what's left over, or unneeded, or unwanted. In some ways, this was the nature of Cain's gift. It was just some of what he had. While Abel's gift was the choicest portion, the fat portion, of the first fruits of his labor. He gave before he even knew there would be more to give from. He gave in recognition of God's bounty and in trust that God would provide for his needs. The subject of money and wealth continues to pop up in more of the Old Testament stories as well as in the Proverbs and prophets. And even as we turn to the New Testament, Jesus frequently teaches on matters of money and wealth. In fact, just a few months ago, we were doing sermons from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, you can't serve two masters. You will love one and hate the other. You can't serve God and money, Jesus said. He also said, don't store up treasure on earth, which can be destroyed, but store up your treasure in heaven, where it will last and endure. Because where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. And so throughout Jesus' teachings and his interactions with people, Jesus talks about money and wealth. But he doesn't condemn riches. I think that's really important for us to understand. But he does impress upon his disciples the importance of having a right attitude and disposition towards our money and possessions. The emphasis continues on into the book of Acts and ultimately into the epistles, which we see from today's reading from 2 Corinthians. But I want to launch into our study a little bit more today by not from one of the readings that's already been read, but the one I shared with the children this morning. It's Mark chapter 12. It's a familiar story. Jesus sat across from the collection box for the temple treasury and observed how the crowd gave their money. Many rich people were throwing in lots of money. One poor widow came forward and put in 2 small copper coins worth a penny. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than anyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them were giving out of their spare change, but she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had, even what she needed to live. So there's this story of a businessman who needed $1 million. I'm adding humor in because this is a really heavy subject no one likes. So he needs $1 million to close an important deal. So he goes into church to pray for money. Well, he finds himself sitting beside a man who's praying for $100 to pay an urgent debt. So the businessman took out a $100 bill from his pocket and put it in the man's hand. Well, the man was overjoyed, got up, and left the church. The businessman then closed his eyes and prayed, "God, now that I have your undivided attention." In Mark's gospel, there is a lot of attention getting going on. Jesus is sitting in the outer court of the temple, watching as the crowd gives their offerings. The rich are coming along with large sums, and mind you, it's coinage. And they're throwing it in, it says. And these receptacles were metal receptacles. So you can imagine the sound of the coins. It was a trumpet kind of sound. These folks were drawing attention to themselves. But they are not the ones who get Jesus' attention. You know, his attention is captured by this lowly widow who places 2 small coins in the receptacle. Her gift goes unnoticed by the others, but is praised by Jesus, who says to his disciples, the rich gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of all she had. Now again, before we think that Jesus wants us to give all of our money away, note he does not condemn the rich for their giving. Giving is not about how much we give. We have this notion of tithing. I imagine you grew up hearing about this standard of giving, am I correct? It's an Old Testament practice dating back to the days of Moses. And in a nutshell, the tithe was put in place because one of the tribes of Israel, the Levites, were not given an allotment of land and possession. It was their job to attend to the spiritual life of the people, and their responsibility, thus, of the other 11 tribes, was to give a portion or a tithe to support the work of the temple or the tabernacle in the wilderness and the Levite community. Interestingly, the New Testament does not specifically require a tithe, nor does it say the standard is waived. But what we do know is that Jesus often focused less on legalisms and more on the disposition of the heart and the mind and the will. In this story, the rich are giving out of duty, and yes, they were being noticed. But the widow gave all she had. And you know, it's interesting, she really had an excuse not to give because she didn't have much. But from a heart devoted to God and to the work of God, she gave all she had. So her story offers for us an insight into giving that I really want to emphasize today. Because, see, she gave herself first, and then her money followed. You know, there was a wealthy man who had never been known for his generosity to the church. The church was involved in a big financial campaign, so he was paid a visit. After the stewardship team made their pitch, the man responded, "Well, I see you came here thinking you had it all figured out, that I would just give you what you needed. Well, did you know I have a widowed mother who needs my support?" And they said, "No, we didn't." Well, then he went on to say, "Did you know I have a sister who was left by her drunken husband, and that she and her 5 children have no means of support besides me?" And they said, "Well, no." And he says, "Did you know that I have a brother who was crippled in an auto accident such that I am his only means of support?" Well, now they're very embarrassed. And they simply responded, "No, sir, we did not know any of that." And the man said triumphantly, "I've never given a cent to any of them, so why would I give anything to you?" Yeah, get your attention, huh? The point is that the man had not given his heart. You notice how oftentimes we follow the things that are important to us, that we're concerned about, the things that have captured our heart, That's where our money goes. That's where our time goes. That's where our energy goes. That's the story of this widow. Her heart had been turned towards God, and thus her money, her resource, followed thereafter. Giving is an inevitable result of a warmed heart. In our walk of faith, Jesus doesn't want our money. He wants our heart, our lives first. That great command to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. When our heart is disposed towards God and the work of God, our resources and our time will follow. You know, there's another story where we see that devotion as well. It's the reading from Exodus this morning. It's an interesting story. Chapters 25 to 31 and 35 to 40 offer an account of the construction of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, the sanctuary in the wilderness. There are 13 chapters out of 40 that are devoted to the building of the tabernacle. It's significant because the tabernacle would be the dwelling place of God during the wilderness travels. Chapter 40 even closes with the glory of God filling that completed structure. Now, way back in chapter 12, there's something interesting that happens that's important for this story. The Israelites are preparing to leave Egypt, and they are told to take with them the gold and silver and bronze and other valuables that belonged to the Egyptians. And the Egyptians are so eager to get rid of the Israelites that they gladly give them whatever they ask for. Now, it seems odd when you read that back in chapter 12 that God would have the Israelites who are walking through the wilderness carry all this stuff. But you know, God has a plan. What seems strange in chapter 12 makes total sense in chapter 35. The tabernacle plans have been drawn up, and Bezalel and Oholiab have been hired as general contractors, and Moses calls the people. He lays out the plan before them and then says, it's time for an offering, folks. Materials and skills necessary for the building of the tabernacle. When he finishes, everybody goes home. But the next scene is amazing. The floodgates burst open and the gifts begin pouring in. Materials and labor, men and women participate. Chapter 35, verse 21 tells us, everyone who was willing and whose heart was moved brought an offering to the Lord's work. There was nothing compulsory about this offering. They gave because of their devotion to God and the work of God in their midst. Their giving followed their heart. And what I find so incredible about this story happens in chapter 36. Bezalel and Oholiab come to Moses, and they say, Moses, you got to tell the people to stop. We have more than enough for the work. And so Moses sends out word and tells the people to stop. They are restrained. Imagine that, a pastor's dream to tell their congregation to stop giving. The Israelites' hearts are so overcome by their devotion to God and the work of God, they gave until there was more than enough for the work. It's like the story of the widow. We see how resources and time will follow a heart that's committed to God and the purposes of God. You know, there are many reasons people give to the church. And I've seen several, both in my years as a layperson and as a pastor. There's some who give to forward an agenda. Several years ago in my home church, a $2 million gift was given. There were some strings attached to that gift. The dollars were to be used to build a new sanctuary. Well, when all was said and done, the church ended up with an indebtedness exceeding the gift. It wasn't much of a gift. Some give or fail to give to exert influence. When I was serving as an associate in Tucson, the church hired a consultant to manage a stewardship campaign, and it was costly. Some of the members of the church saw it as a waste of money, and so they stopped giving. Some give begrudgingly. That offering plate goes by and they feel the weight of peer pressure, so they drop a buck or two in so no one will think less of them. There are some who give out of duty because that's what I've been taught to do my whole life. Well, needless to say, these are poor motivations for giving. and not giving. Giving is a spiritual discipline, a barometer of our Christian maturity and faith in God. Instead of grudge giving or duty giving, as we mature in faith, we become those who are thanks giving. We give out of gratitude for all that God has done for us, remembering that God is the source of our life, provides for our physical needs, provides our daily bread, gives us the gifts and talents necessary to make a living and to care for our families. And there are the spiritual benefits that we enjoy. In Christ, we have victory over sin and death, forgiveness of sins, the promise of everlasting life. We have peace and purpose and joy. Abundance of grace given to us. So our giving ought to flow out of a heart of gratitude and devotion toward the one who has given and continues to give us much. As I've thought about giving, you won't hear too many sermons from me on giving. And it's not because I don't think it's important, and I certainly will never, unless we're totally desperate, get up and make some plea and pass the offering plate 18 times. Because I believe giving is a spiritual discipline. So I want to share a little bit about my story. Because see, I was one of those that didn't get raised in the church. I knew that giving was part of the worship order. And I always felt like I gave enough of my time, but I give a little of my income because I kept it near. I never knew what I might need it for, as a young person. Well, then the time came where I was asked by my pastor of my church to be the church's treasurer. Boy, is that a fun job. An interesting job. And it was eye-opening to see behind the scenes and to sit down every week and write the checks and record the income and everything and look. And what amazed me and broke my heart was that so much didn't happen in the church because there wasn't the money to do it. And one year, as pretty early on in that, is when I really had my awakening. The youth group was supposed to go on a Sierra Service Project mission trip. The youth director had made the down payment, but she had been terminated, and we discovered she hadn't done any more of the fundraising for the event. And so we were literally weeks away from going. No funds. Kids were signed up, ready to go, and we were short a chaperone and the funds. Well, I'm foolish, and so I agreed to be a chaperone. Oops. Didn't know what I was getting into. And number two, I funded the rest of the trip because I wanted those kids to go, because it would have been canceled. It was a wonderful trip. Made a great friendship, and I'm going to name her name. Her son's in worship today, but Paulette Burns is near and dear to my heart. And I'm a teacher-preacher because of her and her husband, Bob. And that was the moment that the two of us got close. You get close on a trip. That changed my life. I am a tither. I am, and I have been ever since. But I don't require it because I believe giving is a spiritual discipline, a personal choice of our devotion to God and the work of God in the life of the church. When our love of God and our passions get engaged, that's when resources come and things amazing happen. Like the story I shared about Hattie Wyatt with the children. A simple gift of 57 cents inspired so much more. There's 1946, Mother Teresa, confronted with the suffering and dying in Calcutta, didn't have much, but she had passion. And so she started the Missionaries of Charity with 13 members. In the decades that followed, the order grew to thousands of members giving care around the world. 1976, Millard and Linda Fuller began Habitat for Humanity International. But it wasn't international when it started. It was a few people who saw a need for affordable housing for the working poor. In 1982, William and Kathleen McGee, a plastic surgeon and social worker, started Operation Smile. Since its inception, the organization has performed surgery on 18,000 kids in 15 countries to correct, without charge, disfigurements like cleft palates and burn scars, and also training doctors in procedures. William McGee said, "The world is changed by emotion." In 1992, Evie Rosen of Wausau, Wisconsin, started Operation Warm Up America. Evie was a retired needlework shop owner. She was disheartened by news stories about the homeless, so Rosen wanted to do something to help. She said, "Almost every home has little balls of yarn. I thought if we could all knit 7-inch by 9-inch rectangles, we could stitch them together and make a lot of Afghans." Word got out. Churches, retirement homes, craft shops, and in 1 year, with the help of other organizations, the group distributed 16,000 Afghans from little balls of yarn. It is a lot. That ministry reminds me of our own Wrapped in Love. Who knows where God may take that one. What is amazing about each of these stories is the miracle of multiplication. None of the ministries started huge. They started because people had hearts turned towards God and concern about their neighbor. The money followed. First a little, then more. Like the story of the boy who donated his lunch and Jesus fed 5,000. Our work begins with giving what we have to give. It's not about the amount. It's about the heart. It's about first giving our heart and lives to Christ, then allowing our gifts and time to flow from there. We are called to move forward, to be courageous, to love like Jesus, to act for justice, to be united in hope and purpose. And we are called to give, to follow our heart, to give cheerfully, to give knowing that what we give, God will multiply until there is more than enough to do that which we are called to do. Thanks be to God. Amen. Let us now stand and join in our closing hymn.